All right. Hello and welcome to another Expert Insight interview. My name is John Goldin from Sales Pop, online sales magazine and Pipeliner CRM, joining you as usual from a sunny San Diego. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Lisa-Maree Blumenfeld, who has a 20 years of HR experience. How are you doing, Lisa Marie?
I'm doing well. How about yourself? I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you. And you founded Retain, and you work with fast-moving startups like Lyft, nine decimal area systems, as well as Fortune 500 companies like PG&E, Blue Shield of California. You have
Yep.
passion for mid-stage startups that encourage you to start Retain. And so what we're going to talk about today, as we said, is the role that curiosity and communications play in building and maintaining successful teams. I love the concept of curiosity because I
Mhm.
feel like I feel like curiosity is the essence of success in most roles in an organization and most roles in life. But I feel that sometimes, especially today, because we're so distracted with everything else, that we think we're curious, but really we just consume loads of sound bites. We're not really that curious.
That's right. Yeah, definitely. I think you hit it on the head there by saying that it's kind of curiosity can help in all different facets of life, and I think it's gotten watered down, or um, people their intention is to be curious, and we just get so boggled by like their checklists and all the things that we have to do and OKRs and we don't anymore take the time to just be curious and ask a lot of questions and get to really know the people on our teams. Um, and without that, we're seeing high rates of turnover.
hmm And I mean, and I think as you said, I mean, I think we think we're curious, but I think we're
Mhm.
so distracted. So what are some ways that you can actually create a culture and an environment where curiosity and open communication and dialogue and exploring and all of that is encouraged?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to, especially as a leader, making sure you have the time, making sure you have the open calendar that people can jump on and, whenever things are coming up and, they need to talk things out. But the reality is your teams aren't necessarily going to take that time. They have their own stuff to do. And sometimes there's a struggle where people question whether or not what they're feeling is that important enough to my leader.
Mhm.
Um, so one of the things that we focus on is helping people capture their the most important moments in the moment so that then they can talk about it when they're ready. Um, so we've actually started another venture, if you will, called 11. And so with that, what we're trying to do is create an app that allows people to capture their moments in the moment. And
Oh.
then it goes to their manager or their leader so that their leader can listen to it when they're ready and then they can respond in a one-on-one. And our hope is that that'll encourage some of these really authentic conversations to start happening that we're seeing aren't happening right now.
Yeah, well, I think you raise an important point there. The fact is that you can say, "Hey, listen, I'm interested in hearing your ideas. I want to see what you think about this," but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're comfortable doing it, right?
That's right.
And and I may have to. I mean, it's like back in the old days when we used to have meetings in a meeting room with everybody sitting around a table. Remember, oftentimes there were people in that room who had phenomenal insights, but they were never going to share them unless you fa- found a way of saying, "Oh, Lisa Marie, actually, we haven't heard from you.
That's right.
Could you give us your insights?" So you have to be proactive, right? Otherwise,
That's
it's
right.
just the loudest voices are going to be heard.
That's absolutely right. And I think different communication styles is worth noting. Some people, like you mentioned, in talking in front of a group of people makes them very uncomfortable. And so,
Mhm.
even if they have a great idea, that's not going to be the appropriate forum for them
Right.
to really be able to highlight their skills and really kind of bring their thoughts to life. So, I think, being able to have enough awareness and spend enough time with your team to know how each person functions and how they communicate well and what's their preferred method of communication.
Mhm.
Obviously, you want to challenge them outside of just their comfort zones as they grow, but also if you're going to get the best ideas from the best people on your team, you kind of have to meet them where they are too.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point as well. I think they said today that there's something like 5 generations in the workplace,
Hmm.
and we have so many different ways of communicating and consuming information today that we have preferences, and they're not lit,
Hmm.
and they're not necessarily generational. You can have people in the boomer generation who like communications in text just the way millennials do or whatever. But
Sure.
the point being is, to your point, is that is the challenge with leadership, is that you have to
Mhm.
be able to communicate in multiple ways.
That's absolutely right. And I think the other thing too that leaders are finding, because communication is so hard, is wanting to make sure that people do communicate. And then they get to a place where they have a hard time pushing back on some of those ideas. And that's
Mhm.
also the role of a leader too. And so you don't want to shut people down, but there has to be a way to be able to vet some of those ideas in the right way and give constructive feedback in a way that makes them want to continue to participate, but also, coach them through maybe why that idea isn't something that you're going to be taking above or, implementing.
Yeah, and I think in some ways that is a big challenge. I think because we hear so much about being authentic, being
Mhm.
vulnerable, being all of these things, right? And
Mhm.
and and I think that sometimes it has that actually, I think sometimes actually even paralyzes leaders now, because when they have to have the difficult conversations, or they have to push
Mhm.
back on something or whatever, they're so worried now about how they're being perceived. So it's like you have to strike that balance, because the pendulum tends to swing one extreme to the other, but you have to
That's right.
you have to have that balance. Otherwise you're kind of going to be paralyzed as a leader.
That's absolutely right. Yeah, I think that paralysis goes really deep in some people who have had traumatic experiences at work with people who they were given just regular constructive feedback and they
Mhm.
were able to turn it around and say it was a hostile work environment or what have you, that causes risk. And so
Mm.
I think trying to help leaders get to a place where they understand that feedback really is important and giving constructive feedback is important, and not everyone's going to take it well. A lot of people just haven't been trained to understand and hear and accept feedback.
Yeah, I agree, and that's why, I mean, I think it's incredibly important that leaders, managers, all of that are trained, are helped,
Mhm.
given the tools to be able to give constructive feedback. And also, I think for people, I mean, for any employer, whatever, we should flip it around as well, and they should also get some training or guidance or discussion or something that helps them understand how to receive constructive
Absolutely.
feedback.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And that's a hard thing to do because it's so individualized sometimes. We don't know the backgrounds of those who are involved and what they've
Mhm.
experienced in the workplace or elsewhere and why there's different blockers that they have. And so it's hard to do kind of a blanket training. And yet it's so critical to at least start there in the workplace
Yeah, and like
and
I said,
elsewhere.
yeah, and like I said, I mean, it's hard. I mean, it's something that people need to learn how to do. For instance, as we were saying earlier, maybe you come up with a great idea, and instead
Mhm.
of me just saying, "Yeah, great idea, Lisa Marie, but I'm not sure that's going to work," it would be so much better
Right.
for me to say, "That's an interesting idea. What are some of the? Do you think there's any down? What are some of the downside risks? Do you
Mhm.
think of this? What are some of the
Right.
challenges? Do you think?" And so, kind of elegantly put it back on you.
Absolutely. I think that's a skill and a talent that not too many people have, but
Mhm.
is definitely something that can be learned and coached for sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that I've read a lot recently, and people are saying surveys and all that kind of stuff that come out, that it's quite simple, that people just want to be seen, heard, and understood, right? And if
Mhm.
you can see, hear, and understand people, how do you build how do you build around that?
Yeah, I think that's a really tricky thing. I think hiring and promoting the people who either can do that as a leader, or people who are coachable and want to learn how to do those things, I think are really critical. I think sometimes you see organizations that are promoting their top producer,
Mhm.
um, and oftentimes haven't even had the conversation with that producer to see if they even want to do management.
Mhm.
Being a
Yeah.
leader, I mean, being a leader, being a manager, there's so many responsibilities that go with it, and it seems exciting and it seems like the right career path, but for some, it's just not. They don't want to do it. They've never been asked. Um, so you're taking people out of their producing role, putting them in this leadership role, and not giving them the training or even understanding if that's what they want. And that's where you start to see companies start to crumble. And all of that could have been prevented had there been adequate communication at the beginning. Really understanding the people on your team and what they want to do and helping them get there. And in some cases, you might have people on the team who really desperately want to be a manager and they're just missing elements of it. They haven't yet had the opportunity to try some of those things, or they're just not wired in a way that
Mhm.
would be a great role for them. And that's a hard conversation to have as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's a couple of things I wanted to come back to on this. I think one of the biggest issues we have, Lisa Marie, is that over the years we have one career path for everybody. It seems, right? It's like
Mhm.
you start off whatever job you're in. Your career path is, especially in knowledge workers. Your career path is team leader, then manager, then whatever.
Mhm.
And as you said, I mean, not everybody's cut out to be a manager. Not everybody wants to be a manager, but but they're kind of constrained or corralled because that is what is promoted as your career path. So I think organizations, we need to do a better job of having career paths that don't involve being managers, right?
That's
And
absolutely right.
elevating those roles and making them as important.
Right. Yeah, we've started to see companies finally build those career tracks. There's the manager track, and then there's the non-manager track, and the levels are the same, the compensation's the same, but the responsibilities are very different.
Mm,
I think the more that companies can build those things out and show that there's opportunity to grow um, in the way that people really want, or they're feeling equipped to do. I think that's really important if you are focused on retention. Some
yeah.
companies aren't, and they deal with a lot of turnover, and they're for whatever reason they're okay with it. But for the most part, most great companies are built because they're focused on retention and building strategies that work for the employees.
Yeah. And I think the other part too is like self-awareness. I always think that self-awareness is the greatest in lack of self-awareness is the greatest inhibitor of
Mhm.
career progression, life progression, probably.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that and I think that's unfortunate. I remember myself, I did years back when I was in Silicon Valley back during the dot-com era. I
Mhm.
actually went to the psychology department at Berkeley University, where they had a
Okay.
thing where they would do a psychological evaluation of you to see which career, where you were
Yeah.
best. And it was
Mhm.
fantastic. Like I went for 2 days, did all of these tests, and got this stuff back. It was absolutely fantastic and really good. But unfortunately, most people don't have opportunities like that, say, and most people aren't aware of where their strengths and weaknesses are. And I think that's another thing leaders can do is help employees become a little bit more self-aware about what they're
Yes.
good at, and help them to focus on what they're good at. And let's get away from this thing of always trying to like fix something you're not good at.
That's right. Yeah, and I think leaders are sometimes reluctant to do that because they've run into the situation where they're having to give, like I said before, the feedback of
Mhm.
like, I understand this is what you want to do, and yet here's the gap,
Yeah.
and here's some of the things I can help with, and here's just some of the things that are not aligned, right? And
Mhm.
so you people will run into folks on their team that just are hell bent on the vision that they have for themselves, but in some cases that can be really, really challenging for leaders
Mhm.
to work with and try to still stay positive and coach and allow for opportunities for those people. But you're right, if there is a lack of self-awareness, that's a really hard thing to teach.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
probably the the toughest thing. But like you said, I mean, if somebody wants to have a particular career path and they're not suited to it, or they have large gaps, or you really don't
Mhm.
see them as being a, I mean, it comes a point where you can't just promote people into positions because they want to be in there. They have to be the right person.
That's
So
right.
that's where you have those difficult conversations. And maybe it is a question of that person needs to move on. Maybe they'll have that position somewhere else and you'll be proved
That's right.
wrong. Who knows?
That's exactly right. Yeah. And that's a hard lesson. And sometimes it's a hard gamble, right, for
It is.
leaders to make. Yeah. So we oftentimes see leaders who want to retain someone because they've been such a good producer that they
Yeah.
make the choice to kind of acquiesce and say, okay, fine, let's make you a manager. But the problem with that is that now it impacts a lot of different people and not just that one person that you're trying to give feedback to. So we definitely try to coach um, managers in as much as they can, seeing the future on some of those things, right?
Mm.
So if you promote this person, even though you're questioning their ability to do it, what's the risk? How is it going to impact other people? And like you said earlier, just kind of lead that horse to water a little.
Mhm.
Let them kind of see how this path is actually going to be harder for them if they do this promotion just because this one person is pushing for it.
Yeah, and what that does, and I'm glad you raised that, because what that does when you start to, as we said, when you start to make those exceptions,
Mhm.
then you totally you undermine the consistency, right? So
That's right.
now you're not predictable, and
Right.
you're also, and people look at you as a leader and say, yeah, that applies to about 90% of the people, but those 10% over there are his favorites. That doesn't.
That's right. Yeah. And then you just lose your credibility. But it all comes back to, if you can have those conversations early and they can be as authentic and honest as possible early, then hopefully you can make sure that you're creating that tenure with this person that's healthy versus not having those conversations and then be stuck in a situation later where there's expectations that you could have worked through earlier.
Mhm. And I think also, on the flip side too, I mean, there is an onus on employees to also, to also be able to open up and have conversations and
Hmm.
discuss things. And, for instance, even, I think COVID was a great example because, when people went home and were remote and whatever, I mean, sometimes they were more effective and they were happier because they were able to bring their kids to school. So they were able to say
Sure.
between 8 and 9 or whatever, 7 and 8, I'm off bringing my kids to school, and then I'm on, then I'm here, I'm all the way through lunch. But when you have those conversations and you have a mutual understanding and an agreement, I think that's, and to be honest, I think that one of the hardest skills in the world is not learning how to manage down; it's learning how to manage up.
Sure. No, absolutely. And unfortunately, that's how you start, right?
Yeah.
You start by learning to manage up, and that can be
Mhm.
really, really hard. But you bring up COVID, which is obviously something that we've talked about a lot. And there were that, I mean, I think that brought to light a lot of conversations that hadn't happened. And what's even worse is when COVID started to take a turn, and the companies were bringing people back, that's when you realize that there really wasn't conversations that had
Mhm.
happened early. And so the expectations were just all over the place. And it was really hard to rein in. And um, I don't know if, that's both a good and a bad example because I don't think any of us were ready for COVID
Yeah.
or trained on how to handle communication during that time. But it did bring certain things to light about leaders and what they're prepared to do.
Mhm. No,
Yeah.
absolutely, and I think to underline what you said earlier, it really brought home the communication piece and the fact that
Hmm.
you have to over communicate, you have to communicate differently.
Yes.
You can't get away with the one size fits all, voice of God anymore. You need to be you need to be more flexible.
That's right. Yeah. It's an interesting time.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, listen, Lisa-Maree, this has been fantastic. All of
Yeah.
Lisa-Maree's information is going to be below this video. But before we go, please do tell people a little bit more about you and what you do.
Yeah. No, your intro was so great. I kind of want you to do that intro for me everywhere. Yeah, so I run an HR consulting company called Retain. We help companies, usually startup to mid-size. Usually we're like their first HR team to come in and help with all like every bit of HR work. We can come in and help with leave of absence and all of those things as well. And then we also have built, like I mentioned earlier, a communication app. We just got through Techstars for that. And so we're launching that allows for a higher level of communication between managers and their direct reports. So we're launching that soon too. So there's a lot of things going on, but anything in the HR space, I'm happy to talk to people about for sure.
Yeah, well, listen, I would encourage you to go check it out. It sounds like it's a great app because, as we said, you know, the more communication, the more two-way communication you can have, the better. So thanks again, Lisa-Maree. Thank you for
Thank
watching,
you.
listening. See you all again soon.
Bye. Thank you.